going straight in my fantasy draft team.
You could score 10 goals in an Ange Postecoglou side.
Not a great sound back, but I completely agree. I hope the lads don't see this.
Lads, it's Spurs. Lads, it's Tottenham.
Hello guys and welcome to the latest episode of the Sportsman Untitled, and today I'm joined by two special guests. We've got Ricky back from Last Word on Spurs. Ricky, how you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
Very good, and making his debut on the podcast is Joe from Turfcast, Burnley fan. Joe, how are you getting on?
Yeah, really good, thanks.
Your two teams actually met in the FA Cup this weekend, so we'll have a quick conversation about the FA Cup. 1-0 win, obviously, Ricky.
Yep.
What are your feelings on the FA Cup this season and that performance?
Well, look, I'm an old, hopeless romantic that really wants to win the FA Cup. It's been 33 years since Spurs last lifted the FA Cup, far too long. And in terms of the game itself, I think we could both safely say it wasn't one that would be memorable, mostly forgettable, but the goal wasn't. An absolutely incredible strike from Pedro Porro that, quite frankly, was worthy to win any cup tie. And I think ultimately for Tottenham, where we want to be going this season, I think the FA Cup is a real important yardstick in terms of what Postecoglou is trying to do in terms of build the ethos out, obviously develop the squad. And I think having a cup run could be really successful for Spurs. And I think for Burnley in general, obviously, and we'll obviously get Joe's thoughts on it, but I think for them, obviously, the sole focus will be obviously on staying in the Premier League. And ultimately, they've got bigger fish to fry, in the most polite way I say that, whereas Tottenham are trying to build something under Ange. And of course, alongside trying to finish inside the top four and having a cup run would be a great season for the football club.
Agree with that, Joe?
Yeah, I think we do have bigger fish to fry this season. The priority is staying in the Premier League. Whether we can do that is a different debate. It's just a shame because I thought we played quite well in the first half. I thought we can actually do something here. Even though Spurs put a strong team out, I thought we more than held our own in the first half. But yeah, as Ricky says, that goal was a great goal. But, you know, there's been quite a few screamers against us this season. A lot of standing off defending. Same again. We just give the ball away too easily. And I can't remember who it was. I think it was Zeki doing it. Just give the ball away. Porro picks it up, smacks it in the top bins. There's not really much you can do. And then we just didn't really offer anything after that, apart from a chance late at the end. Probably should have done better with. Again, I'm doing it. Just comes from really quickly. But yeah, focus is on the Premier League and hopefully we can stay in it.
There's been a bit of conversation. I heard Thomas Frank talking about there shouldn't be FA Cup replays anymore. It feels like the FA Cup this weekend in particular has been devalued by a few managers. We saw the fixtures picked by the TV companies. Everton Palace on Thursday night. We'll put Spurs Burnley in there on Friday night. Surely the TV companies have got to take more responsibility in showing the magic of the cup, if you like. I mean, we saw Maidstone beat League One Stevenage, which was a great story from them. For your opinion on Premier League teams, you get to watch them a lot. Are you thinking you shouldn't have those sort of games on telly?
Well, I just think the way the FA Cup has been, with no disrespect, devalued over the last few years, and now you're getting fixtures on a Thursday and a Friday, and for fans of Burnley to have to travel up to London on a Friday evening, where arguably, I don't know how you get back home after that, whether it's just the final train, and if you miss the final train, you've got no choice but to stay over in London. I just feel it's really hard to then try and place an emphasis saying it's the magic of the cup, because what's the magic when you're putting it on at that kind of time where it stops, unfortunately, young kids from going to games for the first time. I know that's a one big thing that for FA Cup at Tottenham, that it's a chance for maybe some of the younger generation to go and see Spurs for the very first time, see their heroes, and to put it on at 8 p.m, although given it's obviously, of course, going into a weekend and not a school night, I think that's really hard. So look, for me, I'm an old hopeless romantic. Despite having Emirates at the start, which I'm not the most happy about, the FA Cup is still the FA Cup. It's a really special competition to me personally. I'm named after Ricky Villa, of course, that won the FA Cup for Spurs in that crazy game against City back, of course, in the 80s. So it will always hold a special place in my heart, and I hope it does rekindle, you know, the feeling it has to. But I think maybe what they need to do, and I know there's going to be like a wider debate on this, that maybe there needs to be more of an incentive for the FA Cup. Could it be a situation where you could get Champions League qualification by winning the FA Cup? Something needs to change, I feel, to keep the competition alive and evolve it and keep the younger generation interested, because I feel, with no disrespect, it's more for, you know, men and women over 30 that really value the FA Cup. I feel the younger generation, it's all about the Champions League.
I think with England potentially getting, you know, 5 Champions League places in the next few years, that could be a decent option. Back to you, Ricky, sorry. If this season ends trophyless for Spurs and they don't win the FA Cup, will that be a big disappointment given what Ange has tried to kind of build? And is this why the FA Cup's so important for you this year?
I don't think winning a trophy this season is the be-all and end-all. I mean, Ange just said it himself that there can't be a desperation around winning a trophy. What he's trying to build at Spurs is ultimately an ethos where he wants the club to be consistently challenging for trophies, and that for me is a mentality piece, and that can't all be done over one season or one window or two windows. That's a process that's going to take its time. You're going to have to evolve the squad. You're going to have to also, from the very top of the football club, change that mentality. Tottenham won a trophy for over now a decade. So this is a piece that inside the club, there needs to be more of a focus on winning and not just being there for the sake of being there. So to answer your question, I think if Spurs finish inside the top four or finish inside the European places and have a decent cup run, I don't think many will be complaining. But we know what this competition is like. We're recording on the eve of the FA Cup draw for Spurs. If they get a favourable draw and we get another pairing like Arsenal and Liverpool together, there's a really genuine chance Spurs will go far in this competition.
From your point of view, now you're out of the competition. Who wins the FA Cup this season, do you think? I mean, Man City have been fairly dominant. Arsenal have had a couple of wins. I think it could be a good season for Spurs. Do you think it will be one of the big boys?
Yeah, it always tends to be, doesn't it? Like these days. I know Ricky's just said you need a Champions League qualification for the FA Cup to make it desirable again. But I think all the big clubs take it seriously now anyway. It's difficult. Like we used to see finals like Portsmouth versus Cardiff, and I think Wigan obviously won it against Man City quite a while ago. Cardiff as well, like I've said. Someone else played Man United as well that I can't remember. So you did see these smaller clubs, even in the EFL Cup, the League Cup. You used to see Bradford versus Swansea in the final. You just don't see that anymore. So it's difficult for clubs like ours to go on a run and win the FA Cup. Don't get me wrong, I'd love to see Burnley win a major trophy. That's the one thing I haven't seen them do in my life. I've seen them win. I've seen them beat Spurs at Spurs. I've seen them beat Man United at Man United. I've seen them in the Prem. I've watched Burnley in a Europa League match. All right, it was a qualification match, but still, I've travelled to Athens to watch Burnley play in a competitive match. I'm 35 now, so when I started watching Burnley, they're in Division 4, which is obviously now League 2. And I just never thought I'd see that. But yeah, for the lower clubs, we'd love to go and win it. Of course we would, but I think we've got to be realistic as well. It's difficult now. The big clubs all take it very seriously for someone like us to win it. But yeah, one of the big boys will win it, probably City, because I think City's going to go on that run that City always go on now at this stage of the season. So, but yeah, good chance for Spurs, good chance for Liverpool. United obviously playing tonight, but they'll probably beat Wigan. And then, like I say, City, I'm sure will go on, take it seriously and get far as well.
I don't think the FA and the planners of the FA Cup final expect a Championship team to get there, because the Championship playoff final is the day after the FA Cup final, so that could be quite a squad rotation. Let's move on to the Premier League now. Joe, one of the biggest games of the season, I think, for Burnley, now moved to Friday night on BT Sport, TNT Sports. Burnley host Luton. How are you feeling ahead of this one? Is it a must-win game?
Not must win, but must not lose, I think, at this stage. If we lose, I think Luton are currently 4 points ahead of us with a game in hand, because obviously the Tom Lockyer incident down at Bournemouth. If we lose that, obviously they go 7 points ahead of us. Quick maths, might be wrong, but I'm pretty sure it's right. And I think at that stage, that's probably unassailable. And we've won 3 games all season, and for us to then catch Luton at that stage, we'd need to win 2, obviously, and depend on their results. So yeah, we can't lose it, but going into it, we've got a couple of injuries at the minute. That obviously Lyle Foster went off against Spurs, as did Charlie Taylor. If them 2 are out, it's going to be a big struggle for us on Friday, because as you mentioned, it's now been moved from Monday. It wasn't originally Monday, now it's been moved to Friday, and that's another one. Bad planning again from the powers that be. Like, Luton fans would have had hotels booked, trains booked, and now they've just got to change everything, and some of them won't be able to go with the change of plans. But yeah, in terms of the game, pretty nervous about it, if I'm being honest with you. Like I said, biggest game of the season so far. We might get bigger ones as the season goes on, but yeah, it's definitely a must not lose, and we need to make sure we go and win the match, because if we pull that back to 1 point, then we're in with a decent chance, and hopefully we can do that.
Brentford have got Ivan Toney coming back this month. They seem to be a bit in free fall in terms of results. Everton aren't clear yet. They're in a bit of a sticky patch in terms of results as well. If you do survive, obviously you need to climb out of the bottom 3. Which one of the teams are you kind of targeting that you could overhaul? At
the minute, it's Brentford. The Toney thing does worry me. Whether he plays for them again or not, we'll see. I know other clubs should be sniffing around him if they're not already. Arsenal are desperate for a goal scorer. You saw that when they played Liverpool in the Cup. If they'd have had a decent goal scorer, they won that 3-4-0. They need a goal scorer. He won't be cheap, will Toney. But I think they can do worse than going to get him. Fingers crossed for our sake they do. But yeah, it's currently Brentford. But if he comes back in, he gives them a lift, and you probably think he fires them to safety. So it's difficult at the minute because the gap's quite big now. We are getting better as the season goes on. I don't know if you saw us Spurs versus Burnley at the Turf, but Spurs absolutely battered us that game. I think it finished 5-1, 5-2, something like that. Absolutely murdered us. And Spurs put a strong team out on Friday in the Cup, and we were much better then than what we were. And that's a good yardstick, because obviously you'll be able to see the two differences as well. We are getting better as the season's gone on, and we're a better side now, a far better side now than what we were at the start of the season. And I think if the season started now, we would stay up. I just think because of, we're more than halfway through the season now, and the gap's quite big, and I just think we've probably left ourselves with too much to do, if I'm going to be honest.
Can I just say, what I worry about for Burnley is that when I watch them, I'm so admiration for Kompany by sticking with that principle of football, because that's football that I think for any fan they love to see. But my worry is that without any real change up, I worry for Burnley about if they have got enough tools and resources to be able to get results playing that way. And I think we've seen it in the past, and I don't want Joe, I'm sure, will agree, he's had the likes of Sean Dyche in there that does play a more of a pragmatic brand of football. And ultimately I feel that whilst Burnley, for me, have got players that are very good on the ball, my worry is that they're unfortunately in a league now where the quality level is so high that unless you're willing to change, unless you're willing to adapt, it's going to be very, very hard to to actually win games with that brand. And it's a real shame, because the way Burnley are playing are, for me now, in keeping with what we're trying to do in this next generation of football. But I'm not sure whether there's enough time on their hands now in terms of points available to claw them back to get the results. But I've got nothing but admiration for Kompany, because he was linked to Spurs in the summer, and he was a manager that I think everyone was looking at thinking this guy could be a really, really decent candidate in the next year or two. So I just hope, as much as I would love to see Burnley stay up, because I think, again, it's a club that do, whenever they're in the Premier League, give it their absolute all, it'll be a real shame if there's no real change of style, just to try and see if there is a way of staying up. But it is tricky out there. It's really, really hard.
It is. We have tweaked it slightly. We have changed it a little bit. We're not as gung-ho as we was, but he is still sticking to his principles. And like you say, I admire it. I wouldn't want us, first of all, there's no right or wrong way to play football. No. I don't think Vincent Kompany is playing the right style of football, for example, and just to use a yardstick again that you use, Sean Dyche plays the wrong style of football. Yep. I loved it when we were going to places like the Emirates and Old Trafford and winding them up, stinking the place out and coming away with a win. There was nothing better. But in this brand of football, it is more entertaining. Like last season, I've just mentioned earlier, I watched Burnley finish in the Europa League places, finished 7th in the Premier League, played in the Europa League. But last season was my favourite ever season following Burnley because of the style. We were going teams and turning them over. We were going to like Wigan and turning them over, like just going to these grounds and just scoring 5 goals. It was so entertaining, obviously, to win the league at Blackburn as well. Absolutely fantastic. It will never be topped that season. So this style of football is definitely more entertaining, and I admire Kompany and Bellingham for sticking to the principles, but they have changed it slightly. They have tweaked it a little bit. Like I said, we're not as gung-ho as I was earlier in the season. We've changed the midfield around a little bit. Rather than playing 2 DMs, we've actually gone, weirdly, we've gone for a number 6 and a number 4. Rather than 2 forwards, something like that, and just changing it up a little bit. So it has been changed slightly, but the principles are still the same. The principles are still play football, control the ball well, play out from the back, which some people may disagree with. Obviously, Dyche has gone into Everton and really showed them up, and I know you said earlier they're not safe yet, but I think they will be, unless they get another deduction, which, fingers crossed for football they don't, but fingers crossed for us in a way that they do. That's probably the only way we stay up at the minute. But
is there a chance that if things don't pick up for Burnley and you're kind of in a similar situation now, maybe relegated with five games to play, could you move on from Kompany and press the panic button, or is it more of a long-term project?
It's a long-term project. It's that term, long-term project, is something that winds football fans up, I think, quite a lot, and it's been winding some Burnley fans up at the minute. But you just got to take a step back and look at the bigger picture. Look at where we were when we got relegated. Not under Dyche, because he'd just left, but obviously Dyche was a manager up until he got sacked on Good Friday, I think it was that year. And then we lost Tarkowski in the summer, Ben Mee, Nick Pope, Maxwell Cornet.
Big players for that club.
We lost the entire span of the team because Chris Wood left in January as well, and Ashley Westwood had a big injury and then did end up leaving the following January. So we lost the entire span of the team, and then for Kompany to come in and do what he did last season, to find the players that he found, all right, it wasn't just Kompany, it was the new owners as well. He's got a lot of credit in the bank, in my opinion, and we'd be stupid to say, right, press the panic button, off you go, because Burnley will, in my opinion, when we go down, because I think we will, walk that league again next year. We've got some better players in this year now, and if we keep all of them for next year, than what we did last year. And I think we'll be better next year in the Championship than what we were last year in the Championship. So I think it'd be silly to press a panic button now.
I don't know if Joe agrees. I think more the concern would be, would Kompany be willing to stick by the project? Because I think, again, despite the fact of Burnley's position, And despite the fact that they lack of wins, there'll be men that look at the way Kompany plays and maybe feel, look, with better players, with better resources, can this guy perform better at another club? And the reason why I say that is that I think there's a very, now we're seeing in this league, mantra about trying to play a certain brand of football. And Joe's right, there's no right or wrong way of playing, but the way in which, if I trying to say this in the most politest way, the successful managers do well in this league, the likes of the Klopps, the likes of the Guardiolas, the likes of Arteta in terms of winning games, they have a brand of football that is really, really, I would say, attractive to the fans, and it's one in which is keeping about playing the ball on the deck, passing out from the back into the midfield, using your wingers, and I think many will look at Burnley in terms of Kompany and see this guy is playing a really attractive brand of football with better players. I'm not trying to sell him here, Joe. Can he get further in his career by having better players around him? So I think maybe the question would be more concerning for Burnley, as despite the fact if they were to go down, would it be for Kompany to move on rather than Burnley looking to keep hold of Kompany? I think that's a really interesting debate. Hopefully it's something that Joe hasn't got to worry about and they'll stay up.
I'm personally not worried about him leaving just yet at the minute. Just all I can go off is what he says in press conferences, and he says like he's bought into what we're trying to do. He's bought into what the club are trying to do and what we're letting him do. So just on that basis alone, I think he'd be willing to stay for another year or two.
There's also the elephant in the distance, I think you could call it, of the fact that Guardiola is going to leave Man City at some point, and that is going to be...
We're all waiting for the name.
That is going to be a job that is, I don't know who will be at their peak at that time.
Yeah,
but I think Kompany would have some sort of influence.
Yeah, definitely. It depends.
Well.
Say if he left this summer, Kompany's not ready for that job yet.
Oh, no,
or next summer, Kompany won't be ready for that. So again, like I said, that's another year, another 18 months, probably a year after he might not be ready for it. Even if we, smash the championship, you're going to want to see Kompany take Burnley to the next level if you want him to be ready for a job like Man City.
Definitely. And on to Spurs now. He faced trip to Old Trafford on Sunday afternoon, beaten 2-0 at home back in August. For you, as kind of playing Man United away completely lost its fear? It used to be the toughest.
Can I be honest with you? The problem with Tottenham is when they go to Man United, there still seems this element of that we're still playing United under Fergie because we can never seem to get a result there. It's either the Ronaldo show or it's the Bruno Fernandes show, and it's mad. In the last 3-4 years, every time we've gone to Old Trafford, I have gone there without fear and had a genuine belief that we can go to Old Trafford and win. And stupidly, I feel that exact same way again, going in, of course, to this weekend's game where Spurs are in the process of tying up Timo Werner. As we know, they are in talks as well with Radu Dragusin, one they want to get done. And I think Ange will go to Manchester United, as he has been really all season, absolutely fearless, approach the game looking to win it, play on the front foot. And that's against the United side that I think we've seen, with no disrespect to Ten Hag, and we had this conversation obviously before, we're not quite sure what their philosophy or style of play is. And we're, a year and a half into that project, 2 years into that project. Whereas under Ange, I think we can all clearly see in this very short space of time, in terms of 6 months, what he's trying to do, how he's trying to play, how he's trying to encompass the team into what he wants them to be. And I think there is a genuine belief that Spurs go to Old Trafford now, not going there to pick up a point, but going there to look for all three. Now, look, United on their day can beat anyone. They have got, world-class players. Arguably, they're not all world-class in terms of playing to their potential right now, but on their day, they can be. But in terms of going to Old Trafford, I feel fairly confident. But you never know what Man United are going to get. And I think we've seen that this season. They've gone to Liverpool, they've got a point. They've got results in circumstances where you feel they wouldn't have got results. And they're still at home. They've still got an abundance of a crowd there that, with no disrespect, when they see Spurs, they look at Spurs and think, as Roy Keane used to say, lads, it's Spurs, lads, it's Tottenham. So they'll still feel they're confident at home to Tottenham, but I think Spurs are quietly confident that if they start well at United and get the first goal to quiet the crowd, it could be a really good afternoon for Tottenham.
Just last chat on Spurs and their squad at the minute. Obviously, Son's away this month. How much of an impact do you think is that having on the squad when you combine it with the injuries of Maddison and those creative players going forward? Because it seems like you've kind of come through that bad patch at the minute.
Well, we've only lost Son in the last week, and we also lost Pat Matasar and Yves Bissouma to the African nations, which, Yves Bissouma was the star, or one of the stars of the team in the early part of the season. Heung-min Son has been the vocal presence up front. I'd argue, Burnley on Friday, we really, really missed him. And I don't give Joe bad memories here, but when we did play Burnley early in the season, Son was really at the top of his game and terrorised Burnley on the day. So look, he is a big loss. He's influential in terms of being the captain. Andrew said the same thing as well. But we're hopeful Spurs will get a couple of players in between now and the end of the week, which will hopefully give Ange the opportunity to refresh the squad. But the good thing is, obviously, of course, of beating Burnley, like we did, we haven't got a replay. We haven't got that situation where we're playing midweek. We've got a full week in the build-up to Manchester United. And I think there's a really good feeling amongst the Spurs camp at the moment. From what I understand, all the players absolutely love Ange. They all love playing for him. His motivational talks are inspirational. The players love running through brick walls for him. So, yeah, I think it's a really exciting time at the moment to be playing under the manager. And again, just on the point of Man United, we understand Timo Werner, from my understanding, had the opportunity of looking at United, didn't want to talk to them, only wanted to speak to Spurs, speak to Ange, delighted to join. I think it kind of tells you now where the two clubs are. At the moment, I must stress, at the moment, it's a good place at Tottenham at the moment.
Quite a nice segue there, actually, Ricky, because we're going to have a bit of transfer window chat now. We're a week or so into the January transfer window, always a difficult market to operate in. What do you think of Burnley's activity or potential lack of activity this window? Do you think there's any potential incomings?
Potentially. Vincent, again, all I can go off is the press conferences. He has said if somebody thinks we're going to bring in somebody who is Premier League ready, that won't be the case. We'll do similar stuff to what we did in the summer, where it'll be bringing in young potential that we'll bet in who will come into the squad in later in the year or maybe next year. But there might be a few loans. There was a talk of a couple of loans, and there's not even many rumours. Like the only rumours that we've seen so far at this stage are people leaving, like Connor Roberts potentially going to Leeds, who is not in the team at the minute, so he wants minutes. And Manuel Benson, who should be in the first team for me, in my opinion, is a brilliant footballer, potentially going to a championship club again to get some minutes. So yeah, not many rumours. The only rumour I've seen is Danny Ings on loan, obviously, but I don't know if that's just lazy reporting because he used to play for us and he's obviously not getting minutes at West Ham, so people are putting 2 and 2 together and getting 5 maybe. But again, he's probably past it a bit now. I've not seen much of West Ham, if I'm honest, this season, apart from when they came to the turf. And Danny Ings did play in the first half, the first 60 minutes or so, and he was anonymous. He really was. And I spoke to a lot of West Ham fans before that, and they were saying, I don't want him to ever wear a West Ham shirt again. They were saying they don't particularly like him down there, and I do think maybe, he's a little bit past it. But if Foster gets injured or is injured, like I said, because he went off against Spurs at the weekend, then he's probably better than bringing Jay Rodriguez on. So he probably would improve the squad slightly. But again, I believe he's on like 125 grand a week, or that's what the reported figures are. So Burnley cannot afford that. So it'd have to be a deal there with West Ham where we pay a minimal percent of that wage. So yeah, not many rumours for Burnley at the minute.
Do you think the balance is right with Kompany at the moment in terms of young players, and there's a couple of experienced heads in the squad in there, or do you feel that potentially this window you could benefit from a couple of 30 plus year olds?
Yeah, I think we could benefit from a couple of some experience. We've got Jack Cork, but he's not playing. Charlie Taylor, who does play at left back. But yeah, I think Sander Berg as well. I'm not sure on his exact age, but he's obviously been around a while. So he's probably one of the more experienced players in there. Same with Josh Brown as well. Again, probably on the younger side, but he's got a bit of experience. But I do think we need somebody at the back, maybe a centre-back to come in. Because Jordan Bayer, I love him. And Dara O'Shea's been getting better every single week, but they're both young. So I would like maybe, somebody to come in at the back with a little bit more experience. Because we've got a young goalkeeper as well in James Trafford, who's 21. So he's very young. And I think he took a while to get used to the Premier League. Obviously been playing in League One last year with Bolton Wanderers. He's a big prospect and will be England's #1 goalkeeper, I think, in 5 to 10 years. But right now, especially at the start of the season, he was quite poor. But he has got better every single week. But another inexperienced head in there.
The last question for Burnley's transfer window is that when you got relegated last time, there were a few financial issues, if I remember rightly, the club kind of coming down, which went to big sales that you mentioned before. Would you be wary of kind of the club chucking 20, 30, 40 million at players this window? Would you rather they kind of looked at the long-term plan?
Keep with the long-term plan. Keep with the long-term plan. I think going back to the window you just mentioned, I don't think there were too many financial issues as such, if we don't get rid of this guy, we're going to get points deduction or administration. I was thinking of a case of we're now in the Championship, James Tarkowski's on 50, 55, 60 grand a week. We're going to need to manage that, and you might as well manage it now rather than waiting down the line like your Stokes and stuff did back in the day and your West Broms. Get rid of them big bills straight away, and then bring in some people on lower wages with potential. So yeah, I'd like them to stick to the plan rather than chucking loads of money at it now. And like I said, bring in some loans. We are getting better, as I've said, going back to a previous answer, we are getting better. So fingers crossed we can keep getting better, and the squad that we have now can get us out of it.
Talking of chucking big wages at players that don't impact games, Timo Werner, Ricky, he might be coming into Spurs. And you also mentioned Radu Dragusin, who I don't know much about, to be honest. What do you make? You've probably been watching YouTube highlights and all sorts of clips of them, right?
Well, I've been told to not watch YouTube highlights of Timo Werner over the last couple of years. Look, can I be honest with you? I really see this one. I said this on Sky the other day, that I see this as, for me, really low risk with potential high value for Tottenham, because this is a guy that hasn't played a huge amount of Premier League football. Obviously, he had that break at Chelsea, but he left Chelsea at the time, I think, with the impression that there's unfinished business for the league. And I have to remind many out there that when it comes to players that have fouled at Chelsea, there's a running list of really, really high-profile generational talents that haven't done well there. The likes, of course, of Kevin De Bruyne, Mo Salah. I mean, Andrei Shevchenko was one of the best world strikers. Hernan Crespo was there as well. So, look, I think, if we're being honest with you about it, it's not the greatest failure to go to Chelsea and not be successful. And the guy, when he started at Leipzig, had a really good return goal ratio. I think 1 in every 3 games, which again is not too bad. I think it's more what he offers Tottenham as a player. You know, he's versatile. He can play as a number 9. He can play on the left of the 3. He fits Ange's system perfectly. He's selfless in terms of running and pressing, which, to be fair, are all the make-up real attributes of a Postecoglou system. So if he's not going to come in and contribute 20, 30 goals, it's not the be-all and end-all, but if he can just come in and ultimately be a beneficiary to the likes of Sonny and ultimately add to the likes of Kulusevski in the team in terms of assists, that would be helpful for Tottenham. We haven't got too many forward options. Obviously, Richarlison will be scratching his head a little bit. The guy's recently just got 5 in 5 and suddenly Spurs are bringing another forward. But again, I think many Spurs fans would say, I don't speak for every Spurs fan, because I know many again would maybe highlight the point that we haven't really adequately replaced Harry Kane. Is Timo Werner the direct replacement for Harry Kane? I don't think so. I think he's a stopgap. I think Spurs will probably look again in the summer at their options. But if Werner comes in, hits the ground running, does get 10, 15 goals, my understanding is that the fee is nominal of around 10, 15 million to sign him in the summer permanently, which, to be fair, for a striker that's won the Champions League, been involved in Europe throughout his career, has performed at a really high level for Germany, of course, as well, wants to go to the European Championships, it's much of a no-brainer. So I think for that one there, if Tottenham get it over the line, which I understand it's very, very close, he's already in London, set to do his medical and take the pictures, that should be done by the United game and in the squad 4. Radu Dragason's more of a one that's dragging on, pardon the pun, drag us in, because ultimately, from my understanding, there is interest from Bayern Munich that has come to light in this last 24 hours. But my understanding is the player is absolutely 100% set on the Premier League, wants to play in the Premier League, wants to play for Tottenham, has already agreed personal terms with the football club. It is now just the classic, which I'm sure Joe's heard about before, Daniel Levy trying to negotiate the fee with a opposition club, and we understand there's about 5 million difference in valuation there. So look, there's no secret Spurs have needed a centre-back. They needed a centre-back in the summer. We came in knowing, of course, to this season that ultimately we were leaving ourselves severely short after selling Davinson Sanchez after the English window closed and letting him go to Galatasaray. So we always knew an injury to Van der Ven or Romero, and unfortunately we've had suspensions and injuries to both, we were going to be leaving ourselves short. So for me, this should have been the priority even more than Timo Werner, which was like that was going to actually coincidentally happen first. So I think this one may drag a little bit longer, which won't be what obviously us Spurs fans want to hear. But the key is they get the right profile and they get the right man. And ultimately, look, I've said this so much so far since the window's opened that as long as these are players that Ange wants, that's the critical thing. We've had a situation over the last 12, 18 months where we've had the club signings forced upon managers that Conte was given, Danjuma was given, Jed Spence, clearly players they didn't really want, but they were seen as almost better for the club long term, which has not proved to be the case. Danjuma, no disrespect to him, has struggled for game time even now at Everton, and Jed Spence has just been recalled or had his loan terminated by Leeds United. So I think it tells you a lot that it's important the manager gets who he wants to work with. So fingers crossed Spurs do get both deals over the line and Ange ultimately gets what he wants, given the fact that he's made a super start to the season and he's deserving, I think, of getting the players in that he needs to enhance his squad.
I think with Daniel Levy in particular, you talk about arguing over 5 million or so, but he is quite good at getting good deals. You mentioned Timo Werner, that could turn into a brilliant deal. Joe, do you think Timo Werner can be a success in the Premier League, and what do you make of kind of Spurs' business from an outside point of view?
Yeah, I think Werner will do well at Spurs, if I'm honest with you. I'm in like a fantasy Premier League draft, not a standard fantasy Premier League team, and I'm waiting for Werner to come on it so I can stick him in the team, because I've got Callum Wilson, obviously he's injured at the minute. So yeah, Werner's going to go in. I think he comes in and can get 10 goals, playing in the way that Spurs do. And when Son's back and Maddison's back, that's only going to benefit him. And I do think he'll do very well at Spurs. And in terms of Levy, like from the outside looking in, I know he gets a lot of criticisms. I know Levy from Spurs fans, and you'll know more than me, and rightly so. I'd love somebody like that at Burnley, somebody who's clearly a very good businessman. And I think that annoys people sometimes when you speak of business. It's a football club, it's not a business, but it is. We've got to be modern these days. It is a business as well. If you look at where Spurs were 20 years ago compared to where they are now, I think Daniel Levy deserves nothing but applause for that.
I will get changed if I don't jump back in here. Not two-footed, of course. I think with Daniel, the feeling is that ultimately in critical points in his reign and tenure, where Spurs have been in a situation where they could go on, and there won't be no laughter track in the background when I say this, to maybe potentially win a league or win a cup, they've not generally strengthened at that point in time, whether it's a January or a summer transfer window. There's been critical points where Spurs, if they just bought that extra player in that extra position, what could they have done? I think, again, the famous one that many hark back to was under Harry Redknapp, where Spurs were genuinely in a title race and they signed Louis Saha and Ryan Nelson at the time, which, look, again, they were two experienced players, but ultimately wasn't what Spurs needed. And it's since come out that Harry did have Eden Hazard in the hotel.
Oh, no. What could have been?
Which only happens to Spurs fan that we didn't get it over the line. But there's been many like that Spurs have had some really high-profile players that they've been close to getting over the line and haven't done. I think if we all heard about players that didn't make it, we'd all be quite surprised. But look, I think the thing with Tottenham is that there is a general wide consensus that under Daniel, he has transformed the football club from being ultimately a side that were, when he took over, in and around the top 10 to now obviously consistently challenging for the Champions League. But again, I have to caveat that and say, I think Spurs fans would say that one trophy in 20 years is just not good enough for a side in Tottenham that, when I was growing up, were a cup side and were winning trophies. So again, there's an understanding that, of course, the club has evolved. They are playing in one of the most glamorous stadiums in the world. They are consistently challenging for the Champions League. But ultimately, I think as fans, and again, I speak more for the older generation here, we want to see trophies. We want to see Spurs competing and winning FA Cups and League Cups, and of course getting to the latter rounds of the European competitions. And I think that won't go away until Spurs do start winning trophies. And again, to answer that point from earlier, you asked me, is there a desperation to win the FA Cup? As a fan, there is. I don't think there is as Ange Postecoglou or the board. And I think that is unfortunately the breakdown there. For the fans, we need and want a trophy, but I feel the top of the hierarchy, it's about challenging and getting into the top four and the Champions League. That's where the money is. That's what brings you the players. Somewhere in the middle, there's a balance there, but I'm yet to find it. And again, Daniel, as Joe says, although from the outside, I think many do admire him from the outside, but I think as Tottenham fans, this is a really critical point that he's very much judged on what he's brought into the club in terms of winning, and there hasn't been much.
I think, hopefully, you would have thought that Daniel Levy might have learned from the last 5 years in particular. You know, he appointed Conte. Yeah. He appointed Mourinho. He's missed out on England's greatest ever striker, you know, building something around him and winning things. So you'd hope that under Ange there's a real project, and he knows that now he's got to give them the players that he wants. But you don't seem convinced that that's going to happen.
We do say this with every manager that comes in. You know, we hope Daniel's learned his lesson. We hope they back the manager. I mean, I did say this at the time, and again, look, hopefully I'm proved wrong. You know, he had, if not two of the most successful managers in the world in Antonio Conte and Jose Mourinho. I think both Conte and Jose would say, and they have said this, that ultimately in certain periods where they've needed to get the players they've wanted, Daniel, for whatever reason, or the hierarchy, haven't gone and got those players. Now again, you know, are Spurs going to really push the boat out for Ange? Well, they didn't push the boat out for arguably two of the most successful managers in world football, but he has made an incredible start to the season. Everybody loves Ange Postecoglou. Everybody loves this young Spurs side. And again, for the fear of not being laughed at too much, I don't think Spurs are that far away from having a really, really top side. Again, we're in a situation where they need, for me, arguably 3 or 4 real top quality players to be consistently fighting at the top table with the likes of City, Liverpool and Arsenal.
Right, we'll move on from the transfer window and on to, we've got 5 big questions for you to discuss and debate. Want your opinions on these. First one, just been talking about him. Does Timo Werner score 10 or more Premier League goals for Spurs?
I think he does in an Ange Postecoglou side. I wouldn't be too sure if it was under another manager that doesn't play this kind of football, but I think you could score 10 goals in an Ange Postecoglou side.
You've not seen me play.
Well, I think honestly, the amount of chances Spurs create, I think again, is a real big factor and pivotal point in it. And by the fact Ange has personally called him and said, look, I want you, and the guy's sold on the move, that's the big factor for me. He wants the player, and so far with Ange, every player that he's wanted and got, they've been relatively successful in this short period.
Not a great sound back, but I completely agree. I think he does. I think he does get more than 10. Probably around 12, something like that, simply because of everything that you just said, Ricky. Like it's a perfect style of play for somebody like him, and especially when Son and Maddison are back, it's only going to benefit him, and I do think he gets around 10 to 12 goals.
And he's going straight in your fantasy.
And he's going straight in my fantasy draft team. Well, I hope the lads don't see this actually before.
Oh yeah.
Because they'll start putting in for him, especially someone who's bottom, because you get first pick if you're bottom.
Yeah, we'll have to mute out the name.
Mute that bit. Yeah, definitely.
Next one. Do Burnley stay up this season?
No, I think we've given ourselves too much to do, and I've been getting some stick on the podcast recently for being too negative with this subject, but I just think with how bad we were at the start of the season, the gap's getting bigger and bigger. You look at teams like Forest and you think we're going to drag them into it. They've not won for a while, and then they win 2 in a row. You know, they go to Newcastle and win, or beat Newcastle on whatever they did, and then you see Bournemouth. They were Bournemouth at the start of the season. They just turned into Real Madrid. They won 6 in a row, and I just think that the gap is too big. I think
that could be you though.
It could. I do think we are not that far away from having one of them runs, but I think the gap now is too big that even with one of them runs, unless we win like 6 or 7 like Bournemouth did, I think if we go and win 2 or 3, we're still then in the conversation. We've not pulled away. We'll just be probably around bar where Everton are at the minute. I just think we've given ourselves too much to do. We are getting better. We're a better side now than what we were at the start of the season. I genuinely feel if the season started tomorrow, we'd stay up, but we gave ourselves too much to do. It'll probably be a case of having to go down and come back up again and then hopefully level out.
Ricky, thoughts on whether Burnley stay up or not?
Well, I hope they stay up because they play a brand of football, like I said earlier, that I really admire. And I do really like Vincent Kompany. I just like his makeup, his persona, the way he's just, so humble. I mean, what did make me laugh a little bit was that after the game against Spurs, he was in the auditorium post-match press conference and he went, is this what it's like when we play a big team, all these journalists that are in here, which did make me laugh. I mean, the guy's coming off the back of a defeat. And I think, again, what really, really emphasises it to me at the moment is, and I understand Joe said that there has been a slight tweak in terms of the principles, but ultimately, as I keep on saying, I sound like a broken record by saying this, that he plays such a brand of football that I really relate to, and I love to see that. I would love to see a side stay up playing that brand of football, and I just think he's such a really, really good person to have in the Premier League, just as an individual and, you know, as a character, and obviously what he's trying to do. I think it would be a great loss for the Premier League to not have Vincent Kompany in it alongside some of the talented Burnley players that we're seeing, because I think what you are saying, Joe, is right, that we are seeing Burnley actually get better and better week in, week out. The problem that unfortunately we're in is that it's such an unforgivable league and such a demanding league. Are we running out of time in terms of points being accumulated to be able to get Burnley enough to stay up? That's the problem.
So is it a yes or a no? Are Burnley staying up?
No.
Oh, brutal stuff.
Sorry, Joe.
This might cheer you up anyway, Ricky. Arsenal, they've now lost 3 games in a row. They're out the FA Cup, down to 4th. Do Spurs finish above Arsenal this season?
Spurs can finish above Arsenal.
Got those splinters, haven't you?
Yes. I'm not going to say yes, but they can finish above Arsenal. Look, I think the difference with Arsenal in comparison to last season is they're going through their wobble mid-season than at the end of it, which you look at that in 2 ways. It could be a good thing for Arsenal by the fact that they're going through it now and they'll come out the other end of it and they'll get stronger and they've got a chance in this window, as Joe said. There's Ivan Toney sitting there, Ivan Toney sitting there, and ultimately he will command a huge fee. I feel there's only been an interview come out with him in the last couple of hours where Toney has said that he feels he owes it to Brentford, that given the fact they stood by him, he wants to stand by them. And I think ultimately Arsenal, in terms of the money they've spent, I mean, they've spent a huge amount of money. Huge amount of money. I'm not too sure whether they could afford to then whack down 120 million in this window for Toney. So, I mean, look, again, to answer your question, I think we can. I'm not saying we will, but Arsenal are going through their blip, but they have got a position where they can rectify it now. And obviously last season towards the end, they couldn't, which is key.
Joe, I won't allow such fence-sitting from you for this question. Do Arsenal finish above Spurs, or do Spurs finish above Arsenal?
I think Arsenal finish above Spurs at the minute. I think Arsenal are just probably a little bit better than Spurs at the minute, and I think you losing Son in this month and other players that you mentioned, I think you might have a bit of a, not a blip as much as what as Arsenal have had over the last month or so, but you may have a, I mean, it's come at the right time for you because January's not that busy, I suppose, but I do think you'll struggle without Son. But I think Arsenal, like you said, they've had their blip now, and I think they're going to come out the other side of it. If they sign a striker, I think they could finish second and not challenge City, because I think City will go on that run that we've spoke about already. But if they sign a striker, I think Tottenham won't even come close to him, to be honest with you. But I don't think Arsenal will probably sign the right striker in this window, because as you mentioned there, I wasn't aware of that interview. That interview has hurt me a little bit because I was hoping that Tony would leave Brentford. But yeah, I think if Arsenal sign a striker, they'll potentially finish second behind City. But yeah, I think Arsenal finish above Spurs. Sorry, Ricky.
No problem. But look, I've got to be honest and say it's quite enjoyable. Arsenal sitting there top on Christmas Day, and then suddenly it looks like normal service has resumed to some degree now, where it's calmed down a little bit. But they're an interesting fan base, don't get me wrong. I mean, the one thing also about that fan base is whether you like them or dislike Arsenal, they have an unbelievable belief there when they're in that stadium, they will get results, and that does try and send itself onto the players, and that's what we saw with them last season. So look, I totally agree with Joe. If they do go and get Ivan Toney, I would be worried as a fan that they can have a really still good tilt at the title, but I do feel, given the situation, what they spent in the summer, and the goalkeeping situation, which I don't really understand why he tampered with Raya, bringing him in, and then obviously pushing Ramsdale out, and they've started to tweak their style of play. I just feel there's a lot of underlying issues at Arsenal that I'm not sure can all be resolved in the course of a month or a window. And I just wonder again, people talk about managers being under pressure, Eddie Howe being under pressure. When does Arteta start coming under pressure? He spent a huge amount of money there. So if they don't win anything, is he under pressure?
We'll have to wait and find out that one. Next question. Former Spurs and Burnley star, one player you probably both love, Kieran Trippier. Should he start for England at Euro 2024?
Yeah, just because it's Kieran Trippier. No, but he's been playing really well this year. Probably not great
until the last.
Yeah,
I'm going to say ignore the last few games.
Ignore the last, but Newcastle haven't been great in that aspect either. But he brings in a lot of experience. You know what you get with him. He can get up the line. He can put a ball in. He can put a set piece in. Whether we're doing that for England is a different debate. But he's there if you need it. And he's a very good fullback. And yeah, he hasn't been great the last 6 weeks. But I do think Newcastle will come out the other side of it and he'll start playing well again. So I'll say yeah.
Not for me. I don't think he will, but I do like him as an individual. I just think he's one of those guys that, as you mentioned there, he's had a number of issues or mistakes in the last few weeks and he hasn't gone hiding, which I think is admirable of a player that ultimately does give his everything. I think even at his time at Tottenham, despite when he was going through a tough period of making mistakes, he didn't hide, he kept on playing. And look, I think he'll be part of the squad. I think he's an important person to have around the dressing room as a presence in terms of being a leader, but I don't think he'll start.
I think there's the interesting point as well that I don't think he'll start a right back given... Well, Reece James can't play.
It depends on injuries, doesn't it?
Yeah, he probably won't be involved. I think Kyle Walker's probably got right back locked down. But left back, I mean, we're struggling for left backs at the minute.
And it's just something Southgate likes to do, doesn't it? He likes to stick him there at left back, and that's sort of like what I'm basing it on. But it depends on injuries as well, as we say, and obviously depends if Trippier's form improves.
Spurs players you think should be involved in the Euro squad? Just an additional question. I presume Maddison, you're thinking, should definitely be in there.
Yeah, Maddison should be there. I think obviously Eric Dyer is now close to leaving Tottenham. With no disrespect, I feel that's the right move. Obviously, he looks like he might be heading off to Bayern Munich, which, to be fair, I find that amazing. Really,
he has a cracking 6 months at Bayern.
Oh, you never know. You never know. I mean, Harry Kane, what a friend he's become for him. What an absolute.
I mean, we were linked with him in the summer. I'm not sure.
Would you take him now?
I mean, I'd take him now. Of course, I would.
I think as well with Dyer, no disrespect. I mean, he's playing in a side that ultimately have completely transformed the style of play. And the problem is with Tottenham and Dyer in general that when he does play and he backs off half a yard, you just can't do that in a Postecoglou lineup, and you can't do that as Tottenham play this high line, and you are found out. But I think he's a good player, and if he wasn't to go to Bayern Munich, I think again for any club, we don't expect to say this, Joe, in the bottom half of the table, I think he'd be a good, decent squad player for them. Could start. But yeah, I think in terms of England players for Tottenham-wise, I think James Maddison's the main one that comes out to mind at the moment.
I think there's an outside chance that maybe Trafford takes the third goalkeeping spot. It probably comes a bit too soon, but if you look at the fact that Pope isn't really fancied because of his footballing ability with his feet, I think that slot might open up If, as you say, we expect him to be England's number one in about 5 years' time.
Well, he's been the number one for the under-21s, under-20s for the last few years. So he's obviously in the setup, and that's what England like. They like to bring people through the setup rather than someone who's just started doing well who didn't come through the ranks. Obviously, Pope's got that shoulder injury now. I'm not sure when he's going to come back. I think it's sort of like March time, April time. Will he have enough game time between now and then? But at the minute, like you say, he's not fancied anyway, which I found bizarre because I like Nick, obviously a former Burnley keeper, but I can't say that he's very good with his feet. I genuinely can't, because he's not. He is rubbish with his feet, and he was rubbish with his feet. All he had to do at Burnley was kick it long under dash, and sometimes he kicked it out. That he couldn't even do it at Burnley. But yeah, I would have Nick in there if it was me. But yeah, Trafford's probably an outside shout. But like you said, it probably will come soon. Probably the next one.
Very good signing, I think, for Burnley in terms of the long-term future. Yeah. Right, the last question of this podcast. How do you think both of your teams would fare this season if you swapped managers? Ricky, I'll start with you because you've already praised Kompany quite a lot. Do you think he'd suit this Spurs squad? Do you think he'd still be in the same sort of realm in the table?
I'm not sure we'd be in the same position in the table, and that's just based on the fact that Kompany so far, I feel, whilst he's got some really decent attributes in terms of a manager, I'm not sure if he'd be able to achieve the results that we've had. Just given maybe the fact that, Ange, for all of Ange's criticisms that he had before he came through the door at Spurs, the fact that he had no Premier League experience, the guy has won wherever he's been in these relative leagues. And again,
as
many
he
will
said
mock
in his press conference the other day, he was like, can you imagine yourself winning a trophy? He said, I don't need to, mate. I've got pictures.
Yeah, exactly, and he has. And look, the guy, he's obviously done very well for the Australian national team, for Japan, and people mock, these, again, inferior, whether it's leagues or countries that he's won at. But ultimately, he's gone and won a competition in a country or in a league that ultimately only one team can win, or only one country can win. So I think to answer the question, I think Kompany would fit in really well in terms of playing the brand of football. I'm just not sure whether Spurs would be where they are in the table in relation to results under Kompany. But, as a future Spurs manager, I've got to say, I wouldn't be completely against it. I like the way he plays. I like the way he talks in the media. I like the way he speaks about players and handles himself as an individual. And I hope he's got a really, really big career ahead of him. But I don't see it too long in terms of there being in the future where City will come sniffing. Not right now, Joe. I don't think now's the time. But 3-4 years down the line, if he continues this style of football, we do see an involvement in terms of results and performances and getting teams higher up the league. City won't be too far off calling him, I don't think.
How do you think Ange would be faring in a bit of a relegation battle? Do you think he'd be doing better than Kompany?
I'd say they're probably about similar, to be honest. I don't, because obviously he's not got. He obviously is more experienced than Kompany, but he's not got a million more times experience than Kompany. But I do think Ange might have tweaked it a little. Ange might have looked at it and gone, "This isn't working. I'm going to tweak it a little bit," and brought in some experience, or used some of his experience, should I say? There was a lot of stuff earlier in the season that Kompany got wrong, which I don't think an experienced manager would have done. So we might be a few more points better off, but I wouldn't say we'd be pushing mid-table or something like that. Which is, to be honest, where I thought we're not mid-table, but at the start of the season, I did not think we'd be in this relegation battle in the position that we're in. I thought we'd flirt with it and eventually pull away. And I think maybe with Ange, we'd have just been on the edge of it at the moment. Maybe a little bit better.
You up this season?
I'm not sure. If he'd have kept us up, he'd have kept us up by a few points rather than pushing towards where I thought we could have been. But I don't think he'd have made the mistakes that Kompany made at the start of the season. And I feel like the reason why we are where we are is Kompany made quite a few mistakes at the start of the season by dropping Muric. Like we've said about Trafford and how he's going to be a great goalkeeper in the future. We had a settled team last year. And for some reason, when we came up, we just ripped it up and started again. And I'm not particularly sure why, because Kompany always talks about in his press conferences and on the Burnley documentary actually that we did in the summer, that came out in the summer, players will take about 50 to 100 training sessions to get used to his style, get used to the way he plays. So then with that logic and with that thought process, why has he then completely ripped it up, dropped a lot of the players that were playing last year? All right, we lost Teller, so that's fair enough. We lost Martson and we lost Taylor Howard-Bellis. So you can kind of see it. But then on top of that, he also drops Zarori, he also drops Benson, he also drops Muric. So then you're losing 6 players from the squad, a settled squad last year. And I just don't think an experienced manager would have done that. I think an experienced manager would have looked at that and gone, right, we've lost Teller, Martson and THB, they're gone, we have to lose them. We wanted them back, we couldn't get them back. So now I'll stick with Muric and I'll stick with the lads that we've got. All right, the left wing position, we've got Wilson Odebear, who's class, he's brilliant. And we had Luka Kolyosha at the start of the season. 2 kids with very bright futures in the game and who probably would have forced a way into the team by now. But yeah, I just felt that there was a lot of mistakes at the start of the season. And at left back as well, because he was desperate to recreate what Martson was doing in the Championship last season. and he struggled to recreate it with a lot of the players. And we had a perfectly good left back in the team, in Charlie Taylor, waiting, and he was just desperate to recreate what Mark's been doing last year. He tried it with Delcroix, who's not a left back, he's a centre back, and he got murdered. I think were it Spurs or Chelsea when he got murdered? I can't remember. But he got murdered at the start of the season in there. Same with Connor Roberts, and there was just too much of him trying to recreate that with the players that weren't fitting it. And I just feel like an experienced manager probably wouldn't have made them mistakes. But we knew what Kompany was when we brought him in. We knew he was an inexperienced manager. We knew he's one to build with us, and we will build around him and with us, and we'll push on. So we all bought into it, and thankfully he's bought into us as well. But I think Ange probably wouldn't have made them mistakes. So we probably would have been a little bit better off. But I'm not sure if we'd have stayed up.
Seems like a really good place to finish. Thanks again for joining me, Joe and Ricky. Wish you the best of luck for the rest of the season. I hope Burnley stay up. I hope Spurs win something at least. Cheers, guys. We'll see you next time on the Sportsman Untitled.